Alrighty, so this is the first time I've taught since we started Isaiah. So what I was gonna do today is give a, because each of the four of us has our sort of our own different perspective. We're all theoretically using the same book, but we
I
have
like the way you put that.
each of us have a couple of other resources that we're using. So each of us adds something a little different each time. So, but I wanted for our psalm this morning, this is a psalm that is there's a citation, and if you have a annotated Bible, part of the references, this one of our passages references this psalm. All right, so it's Psalm 80. You want to turn to Psalm 80, and I'm going to read the whole thing, which is longer than we usually do, but to get the sense of it.
There's a closed door policy.
No, come on in. Come on in. You just have to add to the copy before you say.
No, if you're in my class, you'd have to wait for the quiz to be over. I used to give a quiz on the hour, and if you weren't there to start the quiz, I locked the door for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Psalm what?
Psalm 80. Psalm 80. All right. And my Bible titles this psalm Prayer for the Restoration of Israel. And my translation is going to sound a little bit different than everybody else's, but we always get a lot out of doing that.
But theoretically, it's the same.
Yeah. Shepherd of Israel, listen. You who lead Joseph like a flock, enthroned on the winged creatures, shine forth over Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh. Rouse your valor and come to our help. God, bring us back. Let your face shine on us, and we shall be safe. Yahweh, God Sabaoth, how long will you flare up at your people's prayer? You have made tears their food, threefold tears their drink. You let our neighbors quarrel over us, our enemies mock us. God Sabaoth, bring us back. Let your face shine on us, and we shall be safe. You brought a vine out of Egypt. To plant it, you drove out nations. You cleared a space through. It took root and filled the whole country. The mountains were covered with its shade, and the cedars of God with its branches. Its boughs stretched as far as the sea, its roots as far as the river. Why have you broken down its fences? Every passerby plucks its grapes. Boars from the forest tear at it. Wild beasts feed on it. God Sabaoth, come back, we pray. Look down from heaven and see, visit this vine. Protect what your own hand has planted. They have thrown it on the fire like dung. The frown of your rebuke will destroy them. May your hand protect those at your side. The child of Adam you have strengthened for yourself. Never again will we turn away from you. Give us life, and we will call upon your name. God Sabaoth, bring us back. Let your face shine on us, and we shall be saved. So we're going to hear, especially that piece about the vine. When we get into chapter 5, that's where the parallel is in chapter 5. So, but I like the response. God Sabbath or God Almighty, I think some of the translations have, bring us back. Let your face shine on us, and we shall be saved. All right, so Isaiah. So, you know me. I am a person who enjoys what the setting is and what the words mean, so when David gets into that in his sermons, I'm like, whoa, okay. That always catches my attention. But so a little bit about Isaiah. Isaiah, as we read through this, if you guys, at least it has struck me, it's really a collection of, it seems to be a collection of writings. So it's not just one continuous writing. And even in one of the passages we're gonna read today, some of the commentaries said, yep, this is clearly two different pieces that were put together. So, anyhow, so one of the resources that I've been using refers to the prophets of Isaiah. That Isaiah is sort of the global name that's used, but it's written by a number of different people. And that they're social and political analysts in basic is what they're doing. They're visionaries. They sort of have their finger on society's pulse. The Babylonian exile is the background event, for the book of Isaiah, which we've talked about. It's the background in terms of not just during the actual exile itself, but also pre-exile and post-exile. But Isaiah is speaking to that whole broad range of history. And we're going to read in Isaiah 3 today, where the prophet who's writing is talking about how everybody's lost everything. And we're really going to get that sense in chapter 3. There's sort of like three themes to Isaiah that I've seen as we go through this. One is about power being alluring. Good morning. Power being, an alluring thing. All right. And we've gotten some sense of that from the first couple of chapters. And how do we live in a world that's dominated by superpowers? At this time, Judah is being dominated by first the Assyrians, and that turned into the Babylonians. So that's the superpower they're dealing with at that time. So, how do we deal with superpowers today? And what is the responsibility of superpowers? That's another whole conversation. So what warning is there to us in Isaiah as a superpower? A second issue is that the world around the prophets, and we've gotten this sense from the first couple of chapters, the world around the prophets falls short of what it should be. That the prophets are warning about the injustices and the social contradictions that are happening that are contrary to living in covenant with God, to God's covenant with the people at that time too. So God's covenant is, we haven't come across that wording, but God's covenant is whether we're living in, whether or not the folks at that time were living, and whether or not we are still living in accordance with God's covenant. And a third kind of theme is the religious reality facing the prophets in each of the generations. There's accusations, the prophets talk about people with empty acts of worship, being void of justice, that they no longer know God, they've turned away from God. That was in the first chapter. And reacting to this crisis, God asking if God is still there. The prophet's asking, is he still powerful? Does he still care? And we're going to see that when we get into chapter 5 today, which I'm counting on the movie.
Really?
Yeah, I am.
She is the most optimistic of the four.
All right, so just to be sure y'all know, there are, 66 chapters in Isaiah? Okay. All right, put that into the number of weeks.
2026, maybe?
Yeah.
Hey, we took 17 months on John.
What's the?
John in 17 months, Isaiah in 2 years, I don't know. All right, so, those are kind of three themes that, dealing with power, dealing with, that the world isn't meeting expectations, and then the religious realities, people at that time and the prophets, whether these prophecies are being given to folks in the temple, that's one of the main theories, that's where these prophecies were shared, was in the temple.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because, how do you visualize Isaiah giving these messages? And it's like I see people who, you go to New York and you see someone standing on a street corner saying, hell and damnation is coming to you. Right. And so that's how I think that he was doing this. you know, but I guess in the temple,
I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that it's more than one. I thought it was Isaiah, and I was like, Isaiah lived a really long time, but now I'm just like, oh, yeah.
well, and they thought that chapters 1 through 36 were Isaiah,
Right.
but after that, they questioned whether it was
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're
Isaiah.
clearly, and they're, you know, different, people are having to try to figure this out, so there's different schools of thought about all this, so,
There's some that do think Isaiah wrote it all
Right.
and that scrolls were found later.
Oh,
And
Then
did-
there's some that think several people.
Yeah, and then in John, there's a statement made by Christ that, for, you know, that this was Isaiah,
uh-huh,
you know.
yeah, and so, so tradition has been that Isaiah wrote it all. You know, and if Isaiah wrote it all, then, you know, but much of the Old Testament, like we already, you know, we did Genesis. Remember, we learned then that Genesis was a compilation of a number of different writings. That's why there's 2 creation stories. You know, 2 pretty different creation stories in Genesis. So, so anyhow, so that's kind of where I'm coming from, but the meaning is, I think, to me, the meaning is still kind of separate from however many prophets there were that wrote Isaiah. So, and they're between, we're going to get to a passage today that the theme of this passage is similar to one seen in other prophet writings in the Old Testament as well. So, because some of these guys they didn't live too far apart from each other. Kind of,
There was one statement that was exactly the same in Micah as it is in Isaiah, so who said what,
Said it.
and they were contemporaries, I think,
yeah, we'd have to pull out our,
yeah.
Yes, they were
Yeah.
contemporary.
Yeah.
And some scholars argue that that particular statement was so important that the Spirit laid it on both prophets' hearts. So, you know,
Those
We
are
weren't
like
there.
those passages, those few passages that are in all 4 gospels. You know, I can't help but wonder then about the importance of those stories. So. Hey, Gail and Harold, good morning.
Hi.
Hi. All right, so we are gonna start with chapter 3 of Isaiah. All right. So, and this starts off with a really long passage, so I'm gonna ask that we break this up, all right? But before I do, to give a little bit of background, if we can go back to Isaiah 1:1. All right? And whether or not this historical background has any real relevance, you get to decide for yourselves if it does. So Isaiah 1:1, it says, the vision of Isaiah, son of Amoz, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Because remember, the northern kingdom, Israel, had already been overtaken by the Assyrians. It had already been destroyed by the Assyrians. So now we're just in Judah. Which he received in the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. All right. So something I read talked about how it was not an uncommon practice that in those days for the king to have the next heir basically serving with him, so that there was some overlap between the two, so that if, you know, people died all of a sudden back then, you know, you got strep throat, you could die, that kind of thing. So anyhow, so that there would be a king sort of ready, because they've been in training, all right? So Jotham, the second one listed there, he apparently did not live very long. And then Ahaz came in to serve under
And they were
Uzziah.
all sons.
Yeah. So there's that overlap, all right? And so as I was reading stuff today, one place I would read and say, oh, this is referring to Ahaz. And then a few verses later, oh no, this is Uzziah. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't making sense. This isn't in chronological order, but anyhow, so it gets a little confusing. So some folks said that this chapter 3 that we're getting ready to read is during the time of Ahaz. All right, and Ahaz, we're saying, say hi to Chris, Nancy.
Oh, he's painting, what's he doing there? He's trying to take a light.
I will. I'm gonna have to turn off the video or he's gonna get bashful. His lovely wife went out and got a new light fixture for the dining room. And of course, when you take down the old one, you got to repaint the ceiling. So I'm assured he still loves me. So with that, I'm going to turn off the video.
All right, so these kings and stuff are described in 2 Kings, all right? And about Ahaz, it says that he was 20 years old when he came into power, reigned for about 16 years, and was not a very good king at all. So 2 Kings had a lot of negative things. 2 Kings 16, I think it was, had some negative things to say about Ahaz, sorry.
By the way, this is gonna wrap into our David sermon today very nicely.
Oh, no!
Yeah.
That happened in a while. How about that? All right. So as we read this first part of we read chapter 3 going into chapter 4, I couldn't help but reflect on current day events as well as I read this. So if somebody would like to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 15.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Just have to figure out where I'm going. Okay. Because there, the Lord Yahweh armies is removing from Jerusalem and from Judah supply and support, all supply of bread and all supply of water, warrior and soldier, authority and prophet, diviner and elder, centurion, important person, counselor, the person expert in charms and knowledge enchanting. I will make youths their officials. Infants will rule over them. The people will oppress one another, each his neighbor. The youth will be arrogant toward the elder, someone belittled toward someone honorable, because a man will seize one of his brothers, his father's household. You have a coat, you will be our leader. This ruin will be under your charge. On that day he will shout, I won't be one to bind up. In my house there's no bread and no coat. You won't make me leader of the people. Because Jerusalem has collapsed, Judah has fallen. Because their tongue and their deeds were toward Yahweh, rebelling against his glorious eyes. The look on their faces testifies against them. They declare their offense like Sodom and don't hide it. Ah, for their lives, because they have brought about evil for themselves. Say of the faithful person, it will be good, because they will eat the fruit of their deeds. Ah, for the faithless person, it will be evil, because of the reward of his hands will be done to him. My people, infants are their bosses, women rule over them. My people, your gods make you wander. They have swallowed up the course of your paths. Yahweh is taking his stand to contend. He is riding to decide for peoples. Yahweh will come with authority to his people's elders and their officials. You have ravaged the vineyard. The lowly person's plunder is in your houses. What do you mean that you crush my people, lying the faces of the lowly ones? A declaration of the Lord Yahweh armies.
So what does it sound like?
Then and now.
Yeah, so what words would you use to describe what is being described here, what the prophet is describing?
Your life's gonna turn upside down.
Dysfunctional family.
Times,
Yeah, times a million.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of chaos, a lot of disorder, a lot of lack of leadership.
Although we resent the statement that women ruling over them is part of that.
Yeah.
Verse 12,
Verse 12.
infants are their bosses, women rule over them as if they're equivalent.
I don't see, mine doesn't say that at all.
Oh, what
It
does yours
says,
say?
youth suppress my people, women rule over them.
Oh, mine just says, oh, my people, their oppressors pillage them and extortioners rule over them. Mine doesn't say anything about age or gender.
Yours is the politically correct.
Yeah,
version.
I have the women.
Oh, we take it to the next section. Wait a second.
You know, another way to look at that, and please take this in a negative way, but, the feminine tends to be more emotional and the male tends to be more logical. And so I hear a lot of emotion flying around in these words that were just read. You know, just a lot of emotion has come up from both sides and everything, and it's kind of ruling the roost.
Yeah, when there's a lot of chaos and disorder, there is.
Yeah.
There is a
So-
lot of emotion, and that's kind of,
Mhm.
you're right. You're right, that's kind of how human behavior goes when there is a chaos and there's a lot of disorder. Yeah, it's a very emotional time.
Is that what made you think about today's times when you said that a few minutes ago?
I do, this, the lack of supplies to certain to people.
Yeah, the very first verse where they were holding bread and water, that sounds like what we're
Uh-huh.
seeing right now
Yeah,
in the Middle East.
God was about to deprive Jerusalem and Judah of resources and provisions, that when you're overtaken by, a superpower at that time,
Mhm.
that's, the pillages of war, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so the commentator talked about how this is what happens to society as a result of God's judgment. And the prophecy here again issues challenges, excuse me, and makes promises as well. As we get into this, but what happens? So this is all happening because, from reading 1 and 2, people haven't changed so what happens when we fail to change? Was the question posed by the commentator. What happens when we fail to change?
If you don't learn from history, you repeat it.
We suffer the wrath of God. He talks about at one point in time, God is a great believer in justice, and they're not treating people justly. They're not taking care of those he's commanded them to take care of, the widows and the orphans. They're not taking care of each other. As said, too much emotion is in this, too much of their own desires, rather than approaching God and saying, what is it you would have us do? They're deciding what it is they want to do.
Well, it's no wonder that people in Jesus's time thought that if I do something, I have this disease because I did something bad. And where Christ was saying, where was it? The stone fell on the person, and Christ said, why did this? He must have done something bad, or his family must have done something bad. He says, no,
Stones
shit
fall.
happens,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
right.
But this is telling us that God is, that God is doing this to punish, and so no wonder they believe that. No wonder you believe that if you do something bad, because, here God's taking his vengeance because these people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Well, heck, a lot of us aren't doing what we're supposed
Oh,
to
but
do.
if you go back to Kings and read about what King Ahaz was doing, yeah, there's gonna be some stones falling on some people.
Claire, read what it says about Ahaz.
Okay, unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and even sacrificed his son in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on hilltops, and under every spreading tree. And it just goes on, it doesn't get much better,
Right,
so.
right. It just goes on and on and on.
I see it all as skirting the responsibility and laying it all on God. It's easy.
Uh-huh.
Lay it on God. Oh, well, God is having his vengeance and his justice and everything. I don't believe any of that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Step up and take the responsibility.
Yeah.
Put it on God.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's going on with what we're reading here.
Okay, well, let's go on to the next section. All right, so. I know, we're gonna muscle through this. All right, so this next section talks specifically about women, all right? So somebody read chapter 3, verses 16 through 4:1. All right, 16 through 4:1. Okay.
Moreover, the Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are proud and walk with heads held high and seductive eyes, and go along with mincing steps and tinkle the bangles on their feet.
Mine's just
Swinging hips.
mine's also missing.
What,
Yes, come on.
Demonstrative language.
what's not what we reading now?
I know, all right, keep going.
Therefore, the Lord will afflict the scalp of the daughters of Zion with scabs, and the Lord will make their foreheads bare. In that day, the Lord will take away the beauty of their anklets, headbands, crescent ornaments, dangling earrings, bracelets, veils, headdresses, ankle chains, sashes, perfume boxes, amulets, finger rings, nose rings. It must take.
How do they walk?
Vestal robes, outer tunics, cloaks, money purses, hand mirrors,
Stripping them.
undergarments, turbans, and veils. Now it will come about that instead of sweet perfume, there will be putrefaction. Instead of a belt,
They'll
of-
stink, mine says stink.
Mine's a stench.
Yeah,
instead of a belt, a rope. Instead of well-set hair, a plucked out scalp. Instead of fine clothes, a donning of sackcloth. And branding instead of beauty. Your men will fall by the sword, and your mighty ones in battle, and her gates will lament and mourn, and deserted she will sit on the ground. For 7 women will take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes, only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach.
so everybody's gonna get it.
No. But again, it's interesting that it's the women, you know, it's the women who's bringing about the downfall, it's those.
Well, they're gonna suffer. I read it as they're gonna suffer too. They're gonna suffer too.
But they're gonna suffer because they're trying to take hold of the situation, and we will eat our own food and provide our own clothes, and, you know.
Yeah, well, they're bargaining. They're trying to bargain, you know? Just give us your name, because remember, the whole social structure was based for women was based on your
Being married.
your marriage,
Yeah.
you know, so,
It talks about your men are gonna fall by sword and in battle.
uh-huh,
So there won't be enough of them to go around, is how
Right.
I'm reading that.
yeah, yeah, there's gonna be 7 women going after 1 man, yeah, because there aren't gonna be enough men around to go around. So, okay. All right, so then, but then the tone changes in this next passage. Someone would read chapter 4, verses 2 through 6.
I can do that.
Okay,
In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for them that are escaped of Israel. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion and he that remaineth in Jerusalem shall be called holy, even every one that is written among the living in Jerusalem. when the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and shall have purged the blood of Jerusalem from the midst thereof by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. And the Lord will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion and upon her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For upon all the glory shall be a defense. And there shall be a tabernacle for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, and for a place of refuge, and for a covert from storm and from rain.
So the tone changes, so there is still promise, there's still hope. The latter part of, verse 5, and by night smoke with the brightness of a flaring fire, a cloud by day and by night smoke with the brightness of a fire. What does that remind you of?
When they were being led out of Egypt.
Right. Yep. Yep.
But it's not gonna be for everyone. He's gonna have to, the judgment's coming. Like he's saying, I'm gonna get rid of the daughters of Zion, which the way they're described, I'm not sure he means every woman is gonna be destroyed. I think he means,
Just the ones that were tinkling.
yeah, there's the ones that I always looked at it as the hookers,
But he's saying, he's saying, I will wash away the filth. It's almost like,
Right, I'm not hearing that he's gonna
Cleansing.
destroy them, they're gonna be suffering too. They're gonna be
Mhm.
suffering. You know, they're gonna have scabby heads. You know, they're gonna be wearing, rather than wearing, party dresses, mine interprets it as party dresses, rather than wearing party dresses. They're gonna be, and they're gonna stink. You know, they're gonna have a shaved scalp, because they got all these these scabs on their scalp.
So some people, this is pre 586, right? I mean, some scholars are saying pre 586. So,
I don't know, I was saying this is during the time of exile. One writer said this is during the time of exile. This is what life is like during the time of
right,
when the Babylonians are coming in. I can't, Howard, you've got a better, I'm not good at remembering dates. I need to put it on.
well, 586 was the temple destruction and the last exile to Babylonia. So, I mean, I think that he might be describing this future, takeover and all the bad things that are going to happen for the next 70 years while they're in Babylonia before Cyrus,
Right,
you know.
but then, this last passage that we just read. Those who are left in Zion and remain in Jerusalem will be called holy. When the Lord has washed away the filth of Zion's daughters, and with the wind of judgment and the wind of burning cleansed Jerusalem of the bloodshed in her. So, he will create over every house on Mount Zion, and over those who assemble there, the cloud, the flame by night that leads the way, and then this last verse, for over all will be the glory as canopy and tent, to give shade by day from the heat, refuge and shelter from the storm and the rain. That some of the commentaries said that is reference to a tree. And that a tree is a common symbol for God's strength and protection.
also the branch of the Lord, most scholars think that's a reference to Jesus. Or the Messiah.
That looking at it from the Christian lens. Yeah. All right, anything anybody else wants to add about chapters 3 and 4? Woohoo, 2 chapters.
yeah, chapter 4 was.
Yeah.
6 verses.
Yeah.
I was like, did he leave something out?
Yeah.
Go look at the Bible. So, all right. So that was a gloomy one. All right, not that it gets much better, but it's a little bit easier in chapter 5. So chapter 5, my Bible titles this first set of verses as the Song of the Vineyard. So I want to talk a little bit about vineyards, because that's So when you hear vineyard in relation to the Bible, are there any stories that come to mind or any passages or?
There are parables about it.
Mhm.
You know, he creates a vineyard and then, sends his servants to collect the, okay, I'm.
No, you're right.
Yeah, the band.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
surely I'll send my son,
Yeah, he
surely
keeps,
they will
it's in
respect,
Matthew
yeah.
and he keeps,
it's
the
sending,
vineyard owner keeps sending people in there,
Sending
they keep
people.
getting killed, they keep
Yeah.
getting killed. He
Finally
sends his son
sends
and
his
that
son.
person gets killed
Mhm.
too, you know? Yeah,
Mhm.
all right, so in my Bible, this is just a silly thing, but. All right, so here's chapter 5. This list of passages are all ones
Wow.
that, there's a relationship between this passage in Isaiah and all these other passages, including Psalm 80, which we just read, all right? So Psalm 80, that passage in Matthew 21. And then several of the other, prophets, Hosea, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, there's 3 passages in Ezekiel that talk about the vineyard, all right? So, and in a similar kind of way as this passage does, okay? So it starts out with, hey, this is a song for my friend. Okay, this is a song for my friend. So if somebody would read, verses 1 through 7. Chapter 5, okay.
I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress.
Well, that's cheery. Oh,
So you brought up about the parable in Matthew.
Yeah.
And, you know, and in that vineyard too, there was a tower.
Yep.
And, you know, and a wall around it. So, so these similar pieces of the story continue for hundreds and hundreds of years. The importance of that story.
Then you can see where a lot of the parables of Jesus tie in
Mhm.
to Isaiah.
Yep, yep. All right, so mine, we talked about in verse 2, planting the fine grapes. Mine translated as red grapes. Apparently red grapes were considered fine grapes. Now we consider them, oh, those are the healthier ones, I believe.
Those are one of the seeds in them.
You know, I
Seedless,
seedless red grapes.
but not back then, probably.
Yeah, oh no, so. All right, so, then in verse 7, and everybody talks about this in verse 7, all the resources that I went to. Now, the vineyard of the God Almighty is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah, the plant he cherished. He expected fair judgment, but found injustice, uprightness, but found cries of distress. So that last part, he expected fair judgment, but found injustice, uprightness, but found cries of distress. Does anybody, the other translations, anything significantly different?
Like I said, expected justice, but saw bloodshed.
Okay, So what's noteworthy here is this, there's a play on words in the Hebrew. That we don't get in the English. That the word, I have to go back to this. There's one word that is mishpat. And the word for crying out, wait a minute. All right, and then it gets to faithfulness. Wait a minute. Oh gosh, this is so confusing. All right, faithfulness is a word to say, tzedakah, and then a cry that is a cry of pain is to sakwa. So there's the term for all this is paranomasia is the literary term for this play on words. So anyhow, it's there. These two Hebrew words in two parts that are very similar to each other. And so if you're reading it in Hebrew, you get like, oh, there's not a whole lot of separation here because there's two words in each part are so similar. Whereas we miss that in getting it just in English. So, all right, so then if we would read 8 through 24, anybody really want to do that?
I'll take it.
Okay, go Jeff. All right.
You who join house to house, who add field to field until there is room for no one but you, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing. Surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but one bath, and a homer of seed shall yield a measure of you who rise early in the morning in pursuit of strong drink, who linger in the evening to be inflamed by wine, whose feast consist of lyre and harp, tambourine and flute and wine, but who do not regard the deeds of the Lord or see the work of his hands. Therefore my people go into exile without knowledge. Their nobles are dying of hunger, and their multitude is parched with thirst. Therefore Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opened its mouth beyond measure. The nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude go down, her throng and all who exult in her. People are bowed down, everyone is brought low, and the eyes of the haughty are humbled. But the Lord of hosts is exalted by justice, and the holy God shows himself holy by righteousness. Then the land shall graze as in their pasture. Fatlings and kids shall feed among the ruins. Ah, you who drag iniquity along with cords of falsehood, who drag sin along as with cart ropes, who say, let him make haste, let him speed his work that we may see it. Let the plan of the Holy One of Israel hasten to fulfillment, that we may know it. You who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and the light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. You who are wise in your own eyes and shrewd in your own sight. You who are heroes in drinking wine and valiant at mixing drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of their rights. Therefore, as the tongue of fire devours the stubble, and as dry grass sinks down in the flame, so their root will become rotten, and their blossom go up like dust, for they have rejected the instruction of the Lord of hosts, and have despised the word of the Holy One of Israel.
Yeah.
Cassie, we need to go.
Yeah, we do.
On these cheery notes, we will.
Oh, all right. All right. So, so what do you hear in addition to in this passage?
The news,
The news. The news. All right. looking back to verses 12, 13, 14. Never a thought for the works of the Lord, never a glance for his hands, for what his hands have done. So it's like the people are forgetting. They're taking over each other's property. They're tricking each other, I want your yard. So I'm gonna trick you into giving me your yard, that kind of stuff. Abandoning stuff. They're not, their crops are not producing, and they're forgetting. They're going into exile and they don't know enough about God to take with them, to sustain them through that. So like Harold said, more of the news today.
Well, it's a recurring theme throughout the Old Testament. It's like people are close to God, then they start drifting and things go horribly astray. And when, they're devastated, they come back around and then things get better. And, you just keep in this circle. And, it's human nature to a degree. Things have, as he mentioned, it's like, it's not a whole lot different now.
Right. What are we?
We're slow to learn.
We're slow to learn.
Only a couple of thousand years.
Yeah. I mean, my sources on the other side keep giving me a Rolling Stone song. You can't always get what you want. Can't always get what you want. If you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. What have we ever learned when things were perfect? Nothing.
There isn't anything to learn then when it's perfect.
That's what I say. What have we ever learned when it's perfect? We didn't come here for perfection.
For whatever reason that is.
We came here to learn, and suffering goes along with it.
What was,
That's when we learn. If we were looking for perfection, we would have never come here. We would have stayed at home.
what was it Winston Churchill? They have a quote from Winston Churchill that he said, Americans will eventually do what was right after they try everything else. I think
He's
that,
fighting Americans.
well, because he was British and it was war.
He was trying to get us.
Context, gotta put it in context.
Just like everything in here, you gotta put it in context, but I like the Starman movie. Did you ever see Starman?
Yes.
And what did he say? That people always you're at your best when things are at their worst. People are at their best when things are at their worst.
That's what you hope for.
Because that's when you finally set the ego aside.
Right, but do we hear that happening in the prophet's writings here? No,
No, because they're still rejecting the law of the Lord Almighty and spurning the word of the Holy One of Israel.
I don't think they think that things are bad right now.
No,
Things
they're
are going
so-
well for them.
Right, they're
And-
so self-absorbed.
So you're telling them bad things are on the way.
Well, depending on who they are.
Yeah.
The leadership, and I think that early on, it was addressed that Isaiah is addressing the leadership, not the orphans and the widows as
Right,
much
who
as,
aren't being protected now.
right, as what the leadership is doing.
Right, and do you think the people are even thinking about, that God is mad at us? Not yet. Not yet. Yeah.
When things are going well, it's tough to listen to prophecy of doom.
When you think things are
Yeah.
going well.
Yeah.
When you think things are
Yep.
going well. Yeah. You're an individual, right?
All perception.
I think even as a Christian, I often think that I've done something that's worthy of God's anger. And I go to him and say, I'm sorry. But I know because of the New Testament that I'm forgiven, and I go on. I don't think of it as a slow burning anger against me that eventually is gonna cause my destruction. Like, I know, I get convicted in my heart that I've done something wrong and I go and apologize. I have a time of getting myself right with the Lord again. But because I live on this side of the cross,
Or this side, the new covenant. yeah,
right,
this
I
side.
believe that I've been forgiven. I don't stop and think that I'm gonna be swept up in the big destruction that is against those who are ignoring.
But now, how much of this, and I thought about this after I taught a couple of weeks ago. Isaiah is talking to the country,
Mhm.
to the community. He's not talking to you.
Right.
Right.
We can.
He's looking big picture.
Right. I remember Cindy saying years ago that they didn't have the individual, that's almost uniquely American because of the way our country was set up. If you weren't part of a community, you didn't exist because you couldn't live on your own. Their culture wasn't designed that way.
Right,
Yes.
so there's not much talk about individual
No,
in the
this
Old
is-
Testament.
right. The Old Testament is aimed at the entire community.
Right.
So it wasn't that you're ignoring the widows, all of you were ignoring the widows.
Uh-huh, right, yeah, right. So sort of taking this and moving to now, how would you, and we'll close with this. How are we in this, food for thought, perhaps, how are we at paying attention to the big picture versus just what I want?
Challenged. Yes.
Some days better than others.
Yeah, so food for thought.
You see a lot of good.
Yes, we do, and we lose sight of that, and it's easy to get caught up in
And then you see a lot of clowns.
we see a lot of everything,
Right.
we see a lot of everything.
But that's always, at least,
Well, and
at least so far, we don't, well, that's not true. We probably do have places. We don't have a coliseum where Christians are being slaughtered every day for the entertainment of others, but there might be places that is happening.
Yeah,
But we have 1 million babies a year slaughtered, with abortions. So,
well, all right, so go and ponder this week.
Right.